The hand that grabbed Bruce Lee's arm weighed more than Bruce Lee's entire torso. That's not metaphor, it's proportion. In the summer of 1968, on a cracked sidewalk outside a liquor store in San Francisco's Mission District, a 300-pound police officer seized a 135-pound man he had never seen before, forced him downward by the back of the skull, and told him he wouldn't last 30 seconds. The officer was correct about the time. He was wrong about the direction. The Mission District in the summer of 1968 sits at the seam of several Americas stitching themselves together badly. The storefronts along this particular block, a market with hand-lettered signage where the serifs on the M have been repainted so many times they've grown fat, a wine and spirits shop whose awning fabric has been restitched twice since January and still sags on the left side, serve a population that rotates with the clock. Mornings belong to women pushing wire carts over sidewalk cracks that have been reported to the city 4 times without result. Afternoons belong to men who lean against parking meters with the practiced stillness of people who have learned that visibility and presence are different things. The block runs north-south. This matters only because the sun at 3 in the afternoon hits the eastern storefronts and leaves the western sidewalk in a shadow that starts at the curb and climbs the buildings like a slow tide. The confrontation will happen on the shaded side, near a fire hydrant painted so many times the bolts beneath the enamel have fused into smooth lumps that no wrench could find purchase on. A 1965 Pontiac GTO, deep green white vinyl top beginning to yellow at the rear edge, sits at the curb with its driver's door not quite closed. The dome light inside has been on long enough to dim. This is a foot patrol stretch. Officers walk it in pairs most weeks, their routes printed on mimeographed sheets that smell of solvent and are outdated before the ink sets. Budget cuts in the second quarter reduced patrol overlap across 13 districts. Some officers walk with partners, some walk alone and report the same ground covered in half the time, which is either efficiency or something the department chooses not to examine. Officer Gerald Devane walks alone. He has walked this route for 11 months. The locals relate to his schedule the way coastal towns relate to tides. They do not control it. They do not resent it. They organize around it. He is not feared on this block. He is measured. When he rounds the corner from Folsom, 2 men sitting on upturned crates outside the market shift their chairs so their backs are no longer to the direction he will come from. Not urgency. Geometry. His body changes the mathematics of a sidewalk. At 6 feet 3 inches and 300 pounds, Devane occupies space in a way that rearranges foot traffic. People step off the curb. They do it without thinking, the way you steer around a structural column in a parking garage, not because it threatens you, but because it is immovable, and you are not. His uniform shirt strains across a chest that the department tailor gave up accommodating after the 3rd fitting. The badge sits slightly left of center because the fabric beneath it has no stretch remaining. An American flag patch on his right shoulder has begun curling at its edges, the thread fraying where his arm swings against his torso with each step. He has not replaced it. Whether from indifference or attachment is a question his face does not answer. His hands are what people remember. Not their size, though they are large, but their restlessness. He drums his fingers against his belt buckle in a pattern that accelerates and resets. He adjusts his radio even when it has not moved. He cracks his knuckles in a sequence so specific it functions as a signature. Left hand, pinky to thumb, then right hand reversed. A woman who runs the laundromat 2 doors from the market once told her afternoon customers she can hear him coming before the corner of the building reveals him, not from his boots on concrete, but from the faint popping of his finger joints bouncing off the plate glass of her front window. The street holds 5 or 6 bystanders within what will become the relevant line of sight. A couple in their 40s near the Pontiac, the woman's hand resting on the man's forearm in a way that looks habitual rather than affectionate. A younger man carrying a paper bag, mid-stride when something, perhaps nothing, perhaps the change in sidewalk traffic, stops him against a mailbox. 2 women near the market entrance whose conversation has found a pause that neither is filling. 1 man further back, shoulders and head visible above a phone booth, watching the block with the removed attention of someone who has decided that participation is no longer worth what it costs. The air carries roasted peppers from a restaurant kitchen that closed 20 minutes ago but left its exhaust fan turning. Inside the market, A radio plays a station nobody outside can identify. Not the song, not the language. Rhythm only, muffled through plaster and lath, felt more than heard. The sidewalk at this point is 22 feet wide. Before the hour ends, every inch of it will matter. Bruce Lee is not supposed to be on this block. His afternoon had been scheduled 6 streets north, a private session with a television actor whose name has since dissolved into the particular anonymity reserved for men who were almost famous. The session ended 40 minutes early. 9 seconds of phone call, a cancellation delivered in a voice that carried the specific flatness of someone who has already moved on to their next decision. Lee walked south. Those who later tried to reconstruct his route found a gap they could not close. 40 minutes of walking at any reasonable pace should have placed him east of here, closer to the water, in a neighborhood where the storefront sold different things to different people. He is here instead. On the shaded side of the street, 10 feet from a Pontiac GTO whose dome light has been dying for over an hour. He stands near the curb facing something across the street. A sign, perhaps. The younger man with the paper bag will later say Lee appeared to be reading it, but the sign is in Spanish, partially obscured by packing tape gone amber with age, advertising a service that no longer operates from that address. Whether Lee reads Spanish is a question that nobody present thinks to ask, and no account afterward confirms. What is visible to anyone who bothers to look? A man in a white dress shirt, untucked, with black trousers and flat-soled shoes that carry no brand marking visible from this distance. The shirt has been pressed recently enough to hold its collar shape, but not recently enough to maintain its creases. A pen clip is visible at the breast pocket, though the pen itself has slid too deep to see. His weight sits on his left foot. His right foot rests slightly behind, except behind is not quite the word. It is beneath him, directly below his center of mass, placed with the kind of precision that looks accidental to anyone who has never been taught what deliberate placement actually requires. The difference between those two positions, behind and beneath, is a distance of perhaps 3 inches. It is also the distance between a man standing and a man already in motion before the motion begins. His hands hang at his sides with his fingers open, not the looseness of a person waiting for a bus or watching traffic pass. Open the way a door left unlatched is open, resting in position, requiring nothing to move through it, no preparation, no decision, just the absence of a single obstacle that was never put in place. He has not looked at Devane. The 2 women near the market entrance have looked at Lee. One of them, the younger one, arms still crossed from a conversation that ended without resolution, tracks him for a few seconds and then turns away. Whatever she registers does not hold her attention long enough to override the heat, the boredom, the slow Wednesday wait of a block where nothing is happening. Devane, 30 feet south and closing, has looked at him twice. Gerald Devane was a starting defensive tackle at San Jose State for 2 seasons, before his left knee made a decision his coaching staff spent 4 meetings refusing to accept. The cartilage did not tear in the way that allows for narrative. No single play, no collision, no moment where the crowd noise shifted. It degraded, quietly, over 14 months, the way a rope frays from the inside where nobody inspects. He finished his last game with a knee that functioned and woke the following morning with one that did not. The team physician used the word progressive 3 times in a sentence that contained 11 words. He rehabbed for a year in a facility that smelled of adhesive tape and industrial disinfectant, surrounded by men whose injuries had stories and whose recoveries had timelines. His had neither. He applied to the police academy 16 days after his final physical therapy appointment, passed the entrance exam without difficulty, and posted scores on the physical assessment that the intake sergeant pinned to the bulletin board in the hallway outside the locker room. They stayed there for 6 months. The hand strength test, a hydraulic device that measured grip force in pounds per square inch through a gauge that most recruits watch the way a person watches a scale, recorded Devane at 147. His class average was 88. The sergeant who administered the test wrote nothing in the comments field. The number did not require commentary. 11 physical confrontations in the years since. Not altercations, which implies mutual participation. Confrontations, situations where verbal instruction failed or was never attempted, where a suspect or a civilian crossed into the territory that required Devane's body to become the primary instrument of resolution. He resolved all 11. 8 ended in under 10 seconds, which is not fast by the standards of controlled environments, but is remarkably fast on a sidewalk where footing is uneven, witnesses are present, and the person being controlled has not agreed to be controlled. The remaining 3 lasted longer for a single reason. The individuals involved had consumed enough alcohol to disable the neurological messaging system that tells a human body it has already lost. His use of force reports from this period still exist in partial form, archived in a filing system that has been transferred twice between buildings and once between formats. The language is departmental. Subject was non-compliant. Physical control was established. Subject was secured without further incident. But underneath the bureaucratic rhythm, a pattern emerges that is almost architectural. Devane escalated in a fixed sequence: verbal warning, positional dominance, the use of his body's geography to restrict the other person's options before contact, then physical control applied through his hands, his weight, his understanding that 300 pounds committed to a single vector creates a problem that the human frame is not designed to solve from the receiving end. His confidence is rooted here, in the ordinary, repeatable physics of what happens when his hands close around something and his weight settles behind them, not in aggression, not in some appetite for dominance that a psychologist might identify and a supervisor might flag, in data. 11 data points, all confirming the same conclusion. When Gerald Devane establishes a grip, the encounter is over. Speed has occasionally been a variable. Some suspects move fast for a half second, sometimes 2. But speed without mass is a problem that solves itself the moment the faster body meets the one that isn't moving. This framework has never produced an exception, not because exceptions do not exist, but because Devane's career has not yet intersected with one. The world is full of men who believe their experience is complete because their experience has been consistent. He spots Lee from 30 feet. What registers? A small man, standing in the operational territory Devane has walked for 11 months, doing nothing that carries an identifiable purpose. No bag, no cigarette, no newspaper held open to a middle page, no companion. In Devane's experience, which is extensive within its particular boundaries, a man standing still without props in the Mission District at 3 p.m. belongs to a category that warrants approach. The category has subcategories. Devane does not yet know which one applies. He only knows the approach is justified because it has always been justified, because the department trained him to trust the instinct that precedes the reason. He changes direction. The couple near the Pontiac notices. Margaret, identified only by first name in every account, her surname either lost or withheld, registers the shift before her companion does. Devane's stride has lengthened by approximately half a step, a change so minor that only someone who has watched him walk this block on multiple occasions would detect it. His right hand leaves his belt and drops to his side. His left hand remains on his radio but releases the retention clip that holds it to his chest strap. Individually, these adjustments carry no meaning. Together, they compose a sentence that Margaret can read because she has read it before, on this block, directed at other men, with outcomes she observed from this same distance. Devane's facial tattoos, 2 lines of script along his jawline, the ink faded to a colour that sits between blue and green depending on the light, tighten as his expression sets into the configuration that precedes professional contact. The tattoos predate his career by several years, a fact his supervisors absorbed with the particular resignation of administrators who cannot afford to enforce a policy against a man they cannot afford to lose. The text is small enough that its content is illegible beyond arm's length. No account records what it says. His boots strike the concrete with a regularity that does not increase as the distance closes. 30 feet. 15. 8. At 4 feet he is no longer approaching. He has arrived, and the shadow he casts, which on this shaded sidewalk should be indistinguishable from the ambient dark, somehow adds a second layer that the woman near the market entrance will describe as watching a person step under a roof that was not there. Lee's right foot has not shifted. Turn around. The voice carries no hostility. It carries volume, not raised but projected, pushed forward from a chest cavity large enough to give the words a resonance that has nothing to do with intention and everything to do with architecture. Devane speaks the way a man accustomed to wind speaks even on still days. The words hit Lee's back and keep travelling down the block, reaching the man behind the phone booth 40 feet away, with enough clarity that he will later quote them without hesitation. Lee turns his head, not his body. His chin rotates approximately 30 degrees to the right, enough to bring Devane into the outermost edge of his peripheral vision, where shapes lose definition but movement remains sharp. His shoulders stay exactly where they are. His hands do not change position. His weight does not redistribute. This is either nothing, or it is the first significant event in the sequence. Devane reads it as non-compliance, a failure to complete an instruction, which in his operational framework occupies the space between passive resistance and active defiance. The man at the mailbox, who has set down his paper bag with the careful deliberation of someone freeing both hands for reasons he has not yet articulated to himself, reads it differently. He sees a man who has acknowledged a presence without granting it authority. The distinction between those two readings is the crack through which everything that follows will pour. I said, "Turn around. Face me." Lee completes the rotation. The speed at which he does it is the first thing he controls in this encounter. Slow enough that the motion becomes a kind of response in itself. Not defiance, not submission, but a refusal to let someone else's words set the tempo of his body. His feet move in sequence, left then right, each placement deliberate, each landing silent on concrete that has been reporting Devane's boot strikes for the past 30 seconds. He is now facing the officer. His eyes are level with a point just below the base of Devane's throat, where the uniform fabric pulls tight enough to show the collarbone beneath. Devane's left hand comes up first. It closes around Lee's right forearm just above the wrist, the thumb wrapping fully around the circumference and overlapping the middle finger by more than an inch. The grip does not squeeze, it establishes. The same way a carpenter sets a clamp before tightening, position first, force held in reserve, the promise of pressure more useful in this instant than pressure itself. Devane's fingers are warm, Lee's forearm is dry. The contact between them is skin on skin, the shirt sleeve having ridden up during the turn, and the texture of that contact, rough palm against smooth tendon, is something both men register and neither acknowledges. "Papers, ID, something." Lee says nothing. 4 seconds of silence. On this block, at this hour, 4 seconds without a verbal response to a uniformed officer produces a specific atmospheric change that is not visible but is measurable in the behaviour of everyone within earshot. Margaret's right hand moves toward her mouth, stops halfway, and rests against her collarbone instead. The younger man at the mailbox shifts his weight off the metal casing and onto his own feet. Inside the market, the radio signal drifts into static for 2 seconds and returns to a different song that nobody notices. Margaret considers intervening. Not physically. She has never physically intervened in anything involving a uniformed officer and does not imagine starting on a Wednesday afternoon. Verbally. She has seen Devane conduct these stops before, on this block, with this particular combination of grip and instruction. The stops follow a pattern she could diagram if someone handed her a pencil. Verbal command, physical contact, verbal response from the subject, assessment, release or escalation. The pattern requires a response from the other party. It is a lock that needs a key inserted before it can turn in either direction. When the key does not appear, the mechanism skips forward to a stage that Margaret has seen twice and does not want to see again. What Devane expects is specific and has been confirmed by every previous encounter stored in his body's memory. The flinch, the slight rearward lean, sometimes no more than a quarter inch, that signals the other person's nervous system has accepted the power structure before their conscious mind has been consulted. The micro-submission. Every person he has gripped in this manner has produced it, some immediately, some after a breath, one after 4 seconds that felt long at the time but did not feel like this. Lee's forearm does not flinch, it does not resist, it does not lean. It remains inside Devane's grip, with an indifference that reads as neither courage nor challenge but as something more disorienting than either, as though the grip is occurring in a neighbouring room, relevant to someone perhaps, not to the arm it is holding. Devane's face performs a recalibration so minor that only Margaret, who is watching his profile from 12 feet, detects it. The skin around his eyes tightens, not a squint, a contraction, the orbicularis oculi firing a signal that his conscious expression has not approved. His jaw shifts left by a millimeter, the kind of adjustment a man makes when a bite of food encounters unexpected resistance. You think this is a conversation? No, Lee says. One word. Delivered without volume, without inflection, without the physical accompaniment that human speech almost always carries. No shift in posture, no change in breathing, no movement of the hands or the head or the weight. The man at the mailbox will later tell two people that the word sounded less like a reply and more like something that had been true before the question was asked. A fact about the weather, a reading from a gauge. Devane's right hand comes up and presses down on the crown of Lee's head. The heel of his palm seats against the skull. His fingers spread wide, reaching past the hairline on both sides, covering an area roughly the size of the hand itself. He pushes downward. The force comes from his shoulder, not his arm, a technique, not a gesture, the mechanical difference being that the shoulder has access to Devane's full body weight, while the arm has access only to itself. Lee's upper body folds at the waist. His chin drops toward his knees. His spine curves forward under 300 pounds of directed intention. From the angle of the bystanders near the market, this looks like compliance, a man being folded into the posture the officer requires, a body accepting what the body above it has decided. From the angle of the man at the mailbox, who is now gripping nothing, holding nothing, his freed hands hanging at his sides with fingers that have gone rigid without his permission, it looks like something else entirely, a spring being compressed by a hand that does not know what a spring does when the hand lifts. You won't last 30 seconds against me. Devane delivers this into the top of Lee's head, close enough that his breath displaces the hair at Lee's crown. His left hand tightens on the forearm. His right hand increases its downward force. Both grips now operate from his full body weight, settled, committed, rooted through his boots into the concrete, structural in the way that a loaded beam is structural. The couple near the Pontiac exchange a glance that contains a negotiation. Stay or leave, watch or turn, be witnesses or be bystanders. They stay. Margaret's hand completes its journey to her mouth. The exhaust fan from the closed restaurant seems louder now, its mechanical rotation filling a silence that has become a container for something nobody on this block has the vocabulary to name. The two women near the market have stopped performing the casual posture of people who are not involved. One grips the other's arm. The other has uncrossed her own and stands with her chin raised slightly, watching the folded figure of Lee, with an attention that has sharpened beyond curiosity into something the mailbox man will later call recognition, though he will not specify what was being recognized. Nobody on the block adjusts their weight. Nobody checks the time. The shadow on the western sidewalk has not moved in any measurable way, but the light feels different, thinner, more specific, as though the afternoon has focused its attention on 22 feet of concrete, where two men are locked in a structure that only one of them believes is stable. Inside that folded posture, something changes. Not visibly. The mailbox man sees it, or believes he does, a shift in the angle of Lee's right elbow, inward, toward the body's center line, no more than 5 degrees of rotation, invisible to anyone who is not already looking for it, invisible possibly even to the man whose hands are creating the pressure that the shift is about to answer. 3 seconds of silence pass. They are the last 3 seconds during which Gerald Devane's understanding of physical confrontation will match the physical world. Lee's right forearm rotates. The motion is inward, toward his own center line, using the radius bone as an axis the way a key turns inside a lock it was cut for. 2 inches of arc, perhaps less. But the rotation happens inside Devane's grip, and what Devane's hand is holding has just changed shape beneath his fingers. The tendons running along the underside of Lee's forearm shift their position by fractions of an inch, and those fractions redistribute the pressure across every point of contact between Devane's skin and Lee's. The thumb that had overlapped the middle finger no longer reaches it. The seal is broken from the inside by the thing it was sealed around. Devane's left hand opens. It does not release. The distinction is mechanical, and it matters. A release is a decision. fingers choosing to uncurl, the brain sending a signal that the task is complete. What happens to Devane's hand is not a decision. His fingers spread apart because the structural geometry that allowed them to maintain a closed position has been altered at its foundation. The grip does not fail. It is disassembled. The man at the mailbox watches this happen from 12 feet and will carry the image for 3 decades without ever finding a description of it that another person accepts. The right hand remains on Lee's head. Devane's palm still presses down on the crown, fingers still spread across the skull, shoulder still engaged, weight still committed. This grip at least holds. Lee's spine begins to straighten. The speed is wrong. Not fast, not slow. Wrong in the way that a movement untethered from visible effort is always wrong to an observer expecting cause and effect to maintain their usual relationship. Devane's arm is still pushing. His shoulder is still dropped. His 300 pounds are still organized around a downward vector directed through his palm into the top of a man who weighs barely more than his own leg. The force has not changed. The body underneath it is rising anyway. Devane leans harder. His back foot adjusts, the sole scraping concrete as it searches for a new angle of purchase. His shoulder drops another inch. He is now pushing down with a commitment that, applied to a door, would splinter the frame. Applied to every other human being he has ever pressed into compliance, it would have ended the conversation before this sentence began. Lee keeps straightening. Margaret, watching from near the Pontiac, will say, Lee moved Devane's arm upward. The man at the mailbox will say Lee's head rose and the arm had no choice but to follow. One description puts the force in Lee's body. The other puts it in the geometry of a situation where force has become irrelevant. Neither witness is wrong. Neither is describing the same event. Lee's left hand comes up. It has been at his side since before Devane first spoke. Through the grip, through the command, through the folding of his body and the 30 seconds of sustained downward pressure, this hand has hung open and uninvolved, as if belonging to a man standing in a different encounter on a different block. It rises now to the inside of Devane's right elbow. 4 fingertips make contact. No thumb. The touch is so light it would not press a piano key to its full depth. Devane's arm buckles, not because Lee pushes it, because 4 ounces of pressure arrive at the exact point where the triceps leverage over the elbow joint disappears, a point that exists on every human arm, and that almost no human being can locate without guidance. Devane's own downward force, still fully committed, still carrying the weight of his shoulder and the intent of his frame, passes through an arm that no longer has the structural ability to transmit it. The elbow folds the way a card table folds when the locking pin is pulled. The direction is wrong. The speed is wrong. The sound it makes, a muted, fabric-covered pop that the woman near the market entrance mistakes for a knuckle crack, is wrong. Devane staggers, not backward, left. His mass had been organized around a downward push, and the architecture supporting that push has vanished without transition. His left foot crosses behind his right, a loss of base that eliminates every recovery option his body has trained for. Balance, for Gerald Devane, has been a solved equation for his entire adult life. In this half-second, it becomes someone else's equation, already answered. Lee steps forward. 1 step. Right foot, then left foot replacing it, compressed into a motion so short that the phone booth man will insist both feet left the ground at the same time, while Margaret will insist neither foot left the ground at all. Lee's right hand, the forearm Devane was holding 4 seconds ago, is now flat against Devane's sternum. Palm on bone, fingers pointing up. Not a fist, not a strike. A placement, the way a person places a hand against a wall to test whether it is solid. What happens next occupies a space that language was not built to hold. The man behind the phone booth will say Lee's arm never extended. Margaret will say Devane flew. The couple near the Pontiac will describe a sound, not impact, but displacement, a heavy bag landing flat on concrete from 4 feet. The mailbox man will say nothing happened, a gap in the sequence, a missing frame, and then Devane was somewhere else. Devane's back meets the fender of the Pontiac GTO. The car rocks on its springs. The driver's door, ajar for over an hour, swings wide and rebounds off its hinge stop with a sound like a flat hand slapping a countertop. Devane is not on the ground. His feet are beneath him, his right hand has found the chrome fender lip, and his knuckles are white around it, gripping with the urgency of a man who has discovered that the ground is no longer a reliable participant in standing. Lee stands where the exchange began, -6 inches. His shirt is untucked. It has been untucked since before Devane first saw him. His weight rests on the left foot. The right foot sits slightly behind, beneath, the same position as before, not restored to because it was never abandoned, uninterrupted, as though the last 7 or 8 seconds, which have rearranged the contents of this block and the internal architecture of at least 6 people's understanding of physical possibility, passed through him the way light passes through glass, present and leaving nothing behind. Devane does not let go of the fender. 15 seconds pass, or 40. The estimates from witnesses will never agree, and the disagreement itself becomes part of the record, a measure not of time but of what time does when the apparatus that tracks it has been disrupted. Margaret will say it felt brief. The mailbox man will say it felt like the length of a song. The man behind the phone booth will not estimate at all. He will say only that he became aware at some point that Devane's hand was no longer on the chrome and that he could not identify the moment it released. Devane's breathing is audible from 10 feet, not the breathing of exertion. He has not run, has not fought in any way his body recognizes as fighting. This is the breathing of displacement, lungs filling and emptying at a rhythm set by a nervous system that received information his conscious mind has not yet opened. His badge has rotated approximately 20 degrees counterclockwise during the contact with the fender. The eagle on the shield, which in its correct position faces right with its wings level, now appears to be diving. Nobody adjusts it. Devane does not reach for it. The American flag patch on his right shoulder has torn free at its upper corner, the thread finally surrendering to the friction it has been losing to for months, and the fabric hangs at an angle that turns the flag into a shape that no longer reads as a flag. He is looking at Lee, not with anger. Anger requires a framework, a belief that something was taken, that a wrong occurred, that the person in front of you operated outside the rules you both agreed to. Devane's expression carries none of that scaffolding. What it carries is closer to the face a person makes when a word they have used confidently for 40 years is pronounced differently by someone who learned it first. The ground has not moved. Everything built on it has shifted by a distance too small to measure and too large to ignore. Lee has not moved from his position. His gaze rests on Devane with an attention that carries no expectation, not waiting for a response, not inviting one, directed the way a person's eyes are directed at a paragraph they are still in the middle of reading, present with it but not finished, and in no hurry to be. The mailbox man picks up his paper bag. Inside it is a fifth of bourbon purchased 20 minutes ago from the shop whose awning sags on the left side. He looks at the bag, looks across the distance at Lee, sets the bag back down on the mailbox with a gentleness that seems to surprise his own hands. He will leave this block without it, whether he returns for it later, whether someone else claims it, whether it sits on that mailbox until the postal carrier removes it the following morning. None of this enters the record. Margaret lowers her hand from her mouth. She turns to the man beside her whose arm she has been gripping since before the exchange began, and says something at a volume calibrated to reach him and stop. The words do not survive in any account. Whatever they are, the man nods twice without turning his head, his eyes locked on the space between Lee and Devane. That space is 10 feet now. It had been 4. The additional 6 feet sit on the sidewalk like a physical object, like a piece of furniture that has been moved into the middle of a room where it does not belong but where it will apparently stay. The 2 women near the market entrance have separated. The older one has taken a half step back toward the door, her hand still extended toward where the younger one's arm had been. The younger one stands with her chin raised, watching Lee with an expression the mailbox man will later attempt to describe as recognition, not of a face, but of a category. Whether she knows who Lee is, or whether she is identifying something else, something that has no name but that her body responds to the way a tuning fork responds to its own frequency, is a question that does not get asked. Devane's fingers uncurl from the fender one at a time, pinky first. Each one lifts away from the chrome and leaves behind a small oval impression in the road dust that has settled on the surface. 5 marks, evenly spaced, the unintentional notation of a hand that held on because holding on was the only verb left available to it. He straightens. His right shoulder rolls once, testing a joint that functioned without interruption for 40 years, and then, 7 seconds ago, received information about its own mechanical limits that no amount of bench pressing had ever delivered. He touches his badge with 2 fingers, does not correct its angle, lets his hand fall. His mouth opens, closes. The muscles along his jaw, visible beneath the faded tattoo script that nobody on this block has ever been close enough to read, work against each other in the specific pattern of a man sorting through available sentences and finding none of them adequate. Who are you? 3 words, stripped of the projection that characterized every previous thing he has said on this sidewalk. The volume is conversational, almost private. A question asked not for the benefit of authority or procedure, but because the man asking it has encountered something his experience did not contain a file for, and the only tool remaining is the most basic one. A question, delivered to a man in a wrinkled dress shirt who has just moved 300 pounds 6 feet, using a sequence of motions that consumed less time than it takes to draw a full breath. Lee does not answer for 4 seconds, long enough for the question to finish being a question and begin being something else. An admission, perhaps, or an inventory of what has been lost in the asking. When he speaks, the word arrives without weight, without ceremony, without any of the gravity that the moment seems to demand and that Lee declines to provide. Nobody, he says. He turns south and walks. His gait holds nothing, no declaration, no satisfaction, no residual signature of the 7 seconds that have just reorganized the assumptions of every person on this block. The phone booth man watches him diminish down the sidewalk and will later say that it was like watching someone leave a room they had only been passing through, not a departure, a continuation of something that started before this block and would end somewhere this block would never know about. Devane remains at the Pontiac. 2 minutes, perhaps longer. The restaurant exhaust fan shuts off, and the silence it leaves behind is louder than its mechanical drone had been. A negative sound, a hole in the air shaped exactly like the noise that previously filled it. Inside the market, the radio drifts into the opening bars of a song that someone on this block might finally recognize, except the signal wanders before the vocal line begins, and the melody dissolves into the particular static of a frequency that almost held. The mailbox man crosses the sidewalk to the couple near the car. He says one thing. Margaret will repeat it to her sister that evening. Her sister will carry it to a colleague 3 days later. By then, the original phrasing will have been worn smooth by retelling, the way a stone loses its edges in a river, but the shape remains. Something about the distance between a man who needs to fight and a man who has already finished before the other one starts. Devane resumes his route. Same direction, same stride length. His boots hit concrete with the same metronomic spacing that has announced him on this block for 11 months. But the knuckle-cracking sequence, left hand pinky to thumb, right hand reversed, does not occur. His hands stay open at his sides, fingers extended, as though gripping has become a concept that requires more consideration than it used to. The laundromat woman hears his boots pass her window and waits for the familiar popping that always follows. When it does not come, she looks up from her folding. By the time she reaches the glass, he has already passed. There is no record that Gerald Devane filed a report about the encounter. His use of forced documentation for that week is blank, a gap that reads either as an uneventful 7 days or as the outline of something the department's forms were not designed to contain. The forms had checkboxes. Resistance type, passive, active, aggressive, method of control applied, result of control. They did not have a checkbox for the event in which control is applied and arrives back at its origin in the same motion, at a speed that makes the word motion a courtesy. The mailbox man told 2 people. One believed him. The other asked him how much of the bourbon he had already opened before the encounter, which answered a different question than the one being asked. Margaret told her sister. Her sister told a colleague who held a brown belt in judo and who interrupted the story with a single question. Where, exactly, on the elbow? When Margaret relayed the answer she had gathered from the mailbox man, inside, just above the joint, 4 fingers, no thumb, the colleague sat down on a bench that was 6 feet behind him and stayed there long enough that Margaret's sister asked if he was feeling all right. He said he was. His face suggested the word all right had just become less reliable than it was 30 seconds prior. None of them knew it was Bruce Lee. That identification arrived 3 years later, through a chain of recognition that began when the phone booth man saw a face on the cover of a magazine in a dentist's waiting room and stood up so quickly the receptionist asked if he had been called. He had not. He made one phone call that afternoon to a number he had kept from the old neighbourhood. The person who answered had moved twice since 1968. The details by then had hardened into a story, and stories obey different rules than events. They acquire edges they didn't have, lose textures they did. Devane's career continued 9 more years. His use of force incidents declined from that summer forward, not to zero, but to a frequency his supervisors noted in quarterly reviews without attaching a cause. Whether the decline reflected age, accumulated caution, a shift in patrol assignments, or the residue of 7 seconds on a sidewalk where his grip opened without his permission, is not something a personnel file is built to answer. Personnel files measure what a man does. They do not measure the moment a man discovers that what he does and what happens are not the same thing. The Pontiac GTO was gone by the following Tuesday. The fire hydrant received a new coat of paint in October of that year. The bolt still fused beneath it. The laundromat closed in 1973, replaced by a shop that sold ceramics imported from Oaxaca. The wine and spirits shop survived until 1981. The market outlasted them all, persisting through 3 names and 2 ownership changes, its hand-painted signage eventually replaced by vinyl lettering that peeled in the same spots where the paint underneath had peeled before. What none of those surfaces kept was the pattern of 5 small ovals in the dust on a chrome fender, the impression left by a hand that gripped because gripping was the only response still available, held because holding was the only action that still made sense, and released one finger at a time because the man those fingers belonged to was not yet certain what would happen if he let go of the last solid thing between himself and a question he had never needed to ask before. Whether Gerald Devane ever found the answer is not part of the record. Whether the answer was the point, that part, nobody has filed under anything.